fight!
Welcome aboard. If you're watching this video, let me be the first to say congratulations. You're about to witness the entire shutdown of what used to be the biggest Nickelodeon block second to the main channel. And what makes this video special is that it's a current event bookmark to a video that was made by a content creator 8 months ago. Because yes, I did watch that video. The first video was good, but this one will dive into the very deep, rich history of Noggin for all the 90s millennial Gen Z nostalgia fans. But first we must understand the why.
Illuminating television.
In order to understand how and why Noggin came to be, we must understand the company that was responsible for it. Nickelodeon was one factor, but Sesame Workshop, also known as CTW, was another. The idea dates back to the 1960s, a revolutionary time for America because 97% of Americans owned a television. While the consumption of media went up drastically, studies showed that children consumed almost 27 hours of content per week, which was studied by Joanne Gans Cooney, the former producer for WNET, and Lord Morissette, vice president for Carnegie Corp Educational Research. Both parties had two goals in mind. The first was to educate children with lesser means. The other was to change society through television and media. During 1967, Cooney would take a leave of absence from 13 to research children throughout North America. During this research, would prepare a 55-page document titled The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool Education. This document would in turn be a precursor to Sesame Street being made out of the research. The main goal of Sesame Street, in their words, was to, quote, master the addictive qualities of television and do something good with them. $8 million was invested into the show when it started. During test trials, all three major networks were rejected. Sesame Street would not only go back to the drawing board, but recruit researcher Gerald S. Lesser from Harvard University. After further research and backers, Sesame Street would release on NET on November 10th of 1969 and later succeeded on PBS in 1970. After 20-30 years, CTW would grow in numbers of researchers and donors as the TV series grew in popularity for years to come.
What sparks you?
Noggin would become an idea in 1995 after CTW and Nickelodeon would garner attention and numbers. However, it's a little more complicated than that. PBS Kids, which was also known as PTV, would be making a 24/7 channel which would require paid TV rights with the IPs it had with CTW. Sesame Street would have a 15-year run and stay with PBS as the longest running show on television to date. The LA Times would write an excerpt prompting CTW to a challenge and face the reality of what its core business practices are made of, which were non-profit at best, and basically told CTW in order to be its own thing, they would basically have to branch off and be its own entity away from PBS. Nickelodeon at the time would be garnering attention with the millions of viewers on the channel after a huge overhaul of creators would bring new life to it. Nick Jr. would be a sister channel to the block, and Nickelodeon would be looking to expand its channel as the Big Orange, as CTW would aim to name their channel New Kid City. The two would find out that they were looking to do a channel, and instead of competing with each other, the two joined forces. Thus, Noggin was born. However, it wasn't the name at the time. The name previously was called The Thinking Channel. However, that name was too long. The slang term for head stuck much better, and Noggin was named to better help kids think and discover new things. The executives wanted to make the channel so that kids can find learning fun without them feeling like they are in school. The motto was, quote, kids want to learn. Kids are naturally curious. There are no stupid questions.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
The logo was a half face with the top of the head representing different ideas or topics being syndicated. Various animators would collaborate on different art styles to not only encourage kids to think outside the box and expand their imagination, but also to make it look like, quote, any other network. The channel would launch February 2nd of 1999. The original target demographic was preteens, as the channel believed that the base was underserved when it came to quality educational shows. With that, Noggin would be commercial free and 24 hours a day with shows like The Electric Company, 321 Contact, Square One Television, Crow, Ghost Rider, and Bill Nye the Science Guy. Additional shows from the main Nick channel included Doug and Nick News. These Noggin shows could also be recorded and brought into the classroom. Bill Nye would also act as the head sparkologist in short segments to help kids with their imaginations. While Bill Nye had his own part on the block, he did not serve as the mascot. Noggin's first mascot was named Fred, voiced by Doug Prius, who would also have his own original show called Fred and Your Head Show, which was the first Noggin original. The second Noggin original was called A Walk in Your Shoes. While Noggin was coming up with more original shows, one show would become more popular as a short skit series.
Noggin presents Oogie.
Oogie would be the third Noggin original show, which started out as a short film called A Show of Hands in the 90s. The cast of the show were Sesame Street alumni Muppeteers Tim Lagasse, Tyler Bunch, Noel McNeil, and Stephanie D'Abruzzo. The show was inspired by Josh Seelig, as he was a part of Sesame Street skits involving hand puppets. Josh would recruit the Muppeteers as they would convey emotion through hand signals. By 1999, Noggin would be pitching new ideas, and Oogie would be their third pitch on the original shows that they were producing. By 1999, Josh and crew would be in production of Oogie, as Josh would make his production company Little Airplane Productions. The show was first called Peepo, but was rolled back after the name was taken by an Italian jean brand. As kids were gravitating to the shorts of Oogie, Noggin would make it a full-fledged show in the early 2000s. The show was recorded at Kaufman Astoria Studios in Astoria, Queens, New York. Sets for Oogie were done at hand level with wooden pole sets. Monitors were at the bottom of the actor's level, while audio was recorded with free-range headsets. Every actor had to get manicures and shave their arms every week to keep up the youthful appearance of characters. Tyler Bunch, Grandpoo's puppeteer, was the only actor exempt from shaving, as to give Grandpoo an older look. Many more Sesame Street alumni, Kevin Clash, Martin Robertson, and Cheryl Baylock, would make guest appearances in Oogie and would make their limbs, like feet, play in the show. The longest episode was a 10-minute episode, Theater, which had its own musical numbers written by Larry Hochman. The iconic looks of the puppets were minimal, as the crew was giving glass eyes and small clothing for certain characters, while the characters were talking simple sentences using 2-3 words at a time. The show was lauded for helping kids develop social skills, early literacy, and logical thinking. Fun fact, the theme song was composed by Jared Faber and sung by John Montaga.
Noggin.
By 1999, Noggin would get more preschool shows, as Nick Jr. was making room for new shows such as Kipper, Maisie, and Franklin during February of '99, Dora the Explorer by August, and then Little Bill in November. It was a different time. Gullah Gullah Island, Allegra's Window, and reruns of Blue's Clues would go over to Noggin, as Gullah Gullah Island was on its last season and Jumbo Pictures would move over to Disney. Albeit Jim's prior work done by Nickelodeon was still owned by Viacom, therefore rights to Allegra's Window were still owned by Nick. Noggin would expand its shorts with Citizen Phoebe, Me in a Box, while Oogie was moving into being its own show in the early 2000s. Fast forward to 2001, the channel would have a 40% uptick in original content. Spunk, Big Kids, and On the Team would be additional Noggin originals, while the URL with Fred was an interactive show where kids would choose the topic Fred would do. By April 1st of 2002, Feet Face, voiced by Jessica DeKiko, was introduced as the new mascot for Noggin, while the channel block was moving from a preteen demographic to a preschool demographic. While the transition happened, Noggin would create a new Noggin original show with the Sesame Street alumni and Muppets called Play With Me Sesame. Noggin had a different approach to how it catered to the preteen demographic. The original goal of the channel was to dispel that educational shows didn't cater to just preschool age kids and could be entertaining to preteens and tweens. However, the channel block was seeing low viewerships on late night slots dedicated to the preteen demographic. The New York Times would criticize this, quote, several folded efforts at nocturnal programming. At the same time Feet Face was introduced, Noggin would not only move its demographic in programming, it would change time slots from 24/7 to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. This would expand the block for teen programming, which was distinguished under the N to help distance itself from the preschool programming on the block. Research was done in various social experiments with teens. Many researchers would come back with the fact that teen shows did not help relate or educate educate what actual teenagers were going through on a social level. While in the mid-2000s, various social issues such as body dysmorphia, teen self-cancellation, drug use, date self-identity, and sexual orientation were at the forefront of teen issues at the time. With the help of researchers Maggie Groening and Russell Miller, the N was established. This was a revolutionary time for teens and parents, as the N would encourage teens and adults to watch shows together and have actual discussions regarding what they've watched. Nickelodeon Nation would hail Noggin and the N as a unified channel, unlike its main sister channel. The N original show Out There was the first of its kind, second to its successor Degrassi: The Next Generation, as well as many series such as LOL with the N, Real Access in the N, Girls vs. Boys, Best Friends Date, and Miracle Boys. The last N original show to ever make an impact on the block was South of Nowhere, made by Tom Lynch, responsible for Romeo and Class of 3000. This show, to many critics, was real, raw, and ahead of its time when it came to actual issues regarding teens that Degrassi would have trouble putting into an episode. By April 2nd, 2003, Feet Face would be replaced by Moose Moose, voiced by Paul Christie. You guys may know him as Stick Stickley. And Z, as Feet Face only lasted 1 year as Noggin's mascot. Moose Moose, much like Feet Face, would be very interactive with Noggin, however garnered more songs in the repertoire, such as Are We There Yet, Fantastic Day, the new Noggin sign-on song, Beside the Seaside, Everywhere I Go, as well as seasonal songs like Candy Cane, Falling for Fall, and my personal detested song, I Don't Like Candy Corn.
Don't like candy corn. No, I don't like candy corn.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
There would be a downside to all of this. Noggin would be losing Ubi in the later years, as Nick Jr. would commission Little Airplane Productions to work on their next show, Wonder Pets, only leaving 2 Noggin originals, Jack's Big Music Show and the last Noggin original, The Upside Down Show. Sesame Workshop, while continuing to co-produce Noggin and the N shows, would eventually sell Noggin stock back in 2002 due to debt repayment. Viacom would still, however, have Sesame Workshop in a multi-year contract. Considering that the company already had Sesame Workshop in original shows and airing Sesame Street on its own block, they didn't need PBS anymore. By 2005, Sesame Workshop would go right back to PBS, as Comcast and a few investors would found PBS Kids Sprout. This is where Noggin would run into even bigger problems.
Used my noggin today. I used my noggin today.
Now we get into the bigger part of the story, the shutdown. Hold on to your hats. By the mid-2000s, Noggin in the N would lose momentum as more shows from Nick Jr. and Teen Nick would bleed into the channels as reruns, thus making both blocks rerun knockoffs. Since the only show teens would watch on the N would be Degrassi, there was no room for the N to grow anymore. It became the Degrassi channel. Literally. And while that was happening, Viacom by August 13th of 2007 would shut down Nick Gas and make the N 24 hours instead of half a time slot on Noggin. This lasted 2 years, as it was Viacom's biggest mistake it ever made, along with another bucket list of things that it did. By 2009, Teen Nick would merge with the N as a block called Teen Nick on the N. While Noggin would keep airing reruns, it would lose Noggin.com, and the N.com would follow with it as Nickelodeon was phasing out both blocks. As this phase out began, the inevitable happened. Noggin would rebrand as Nick Jr.
Redundant much redundant?
As we all grew up, let's face it, we kinda did, the viewership would drastically go down. By 2015, Noggin would come back as a streaming service with new original shows such as School of Yum, Kinderwood, and Yoga Friends. While this happens, the N would drown out and rebrand as Teen Nick and get additional 90s reruns called The Splat, which would air old episodes of Hey Arnold, Rugrats, Doug, and Rocko's Modern Life. Noggin as an app would also reach different countries throughout its time. That all stopped on February 15, 2024, as Noggin would shut down altogether. The app would cease billing by May 30th. The staff were all laid off as a result, while Noggin shows were bought over to Paramount Plus as Nick Jr. shows. Noggin as a whole is a byproduct of Nickelodeon's greed and overall laziness over the years. But not just Nick. Sesame Workshop was not seeing the actual impact that it had over an audience of kids and teens that it catered to. Both parties shared the blame in this due to the the fact that it went against every philosophy both companies stood for. Nickelodeon stood for making characters and story and letting the audience grow with the characters, while Sesame Workshop, through the television medium, educated and changed social factors within its shows. Down the line, it would always be about corporate interests and biting off more than it can chew, while not only this, treating Noggin and the N as rerun throwaways rather than expand the ideas. Granted, many people would say it's a financial issue, albeit I advise people to look at both parties and see who Nick and Sesame Workshop were in bed with at the time, and then come back to me. In the future, it would be inevitable on many factors for this block to stay alive in the long haul, as more streaming services are gathering who gets the rights to which shows, as well as cutting out the middleman in general, that being cable. Noggin was bound to see this fate sooner rather than later. On top of that, many Noggin shows were getting short air times on cable television. Granted, we have a few cult classics from the block, but do we seriously want to see another SpongeBob situation happen? I think not. In short, many of us should be thankful that it shut down. Considering the way Nick is going, would you really want it to stick around? Really?
Epilogue.